Hi, I'm Jeff Feingold, editor of New Hampshire Business Review, and welcome to our latest webinar, Trends in Broadband, Meeting the Demands of a New Workplace Paradigm. That's a big word, and I gotta tell you, I think we have a couple of people here who are gonna help us through that. First of all, before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors, and they are Comcast Business and Sheehan, Phinney, law firm based in Manchester. And I want to just thank him personally for doing this, because I think this is really a topic that has, I think, never been more important to discuss. You know, even though we hope that the pandemic's end is in sight, it's still pretty clear that some employers, if not many, will be continuing with some form of remote work, whether full-time or probably more likely hybrid. And that means the focus on the security, reliability, and adequacy of your employers and employees' internet networks has never been greater. So today we have, like I said, we have two experts who will take us through the trends and challenges affecting employers, from cybersecurity, network reliability, and what employers and IT teams can do to address these challenges. So once again, I want to thank our sponsors, Comcast Business and Sheehan, Phinney, and now I'd like to get started, because I think this is a pretty big topic. We have a lot of things to discuss. So first, our first panelist is JP Harris, who's an attorney and a member of Sheehan, Phinney's litigation department and co-chair of the firm's data privacy and security law practice group. He works with clients that have experienced a data breach and also counsel others on how to prepare for and protect against data breaches through risk assessments and drafting policies. So JP, welcome.
Great, thanks Jeff. And thank you for the opportunity to meet with everyone today. As Jeff mentioned, I'm co-chair of the Data Privacy and Security Group, and I just wanted to chat for a couple minutes about the issues we've seen over the last several months. I think this topic is timely. We just had a webinar this morning with our Labor and Employment Group. We had over 300 participants, and we asked them a poll question, and 60% of them responded that they expect the number of remote workers to either stay the same or increase at their business over the next 3 years. And you know, I think businesses struggled early on to solve the technological challenges of getting people working and just sort of continuing the business. But now that reality is kind of sunk in, and so we're in an interesting time where the legal aspect of the world is sort of marrying with the technological aspect to figure out how do we make this work long term. Our clients have done a really good job moving their way through the various employment law challenges, but now we're sort of in it for the long term as employees, I think, have settled in and like this environment. We're also in New Hampshire anyway, it's very difficult for employers to find talent, so they're broadening their horizons. And they don't necessarily have to hire people in New Hampshire, they can hire people in other states. So the things we're working on right now is having clients sort of reassess their risk in this new environment. Whereas they're used to protecting their world and kind of a physical brick and mortar, now we've got all these new access points to the network and people working from home environments. So what does that mean? Accessing whether they are now subject to some new laws because they've got employees or customers in states that they didn't have before. We have states that are adopting new privacy laws like California and Virginia, and New Hampshire considered a similar law. So it's a really interesting time for us. We're trying to help clients find the right balance of compliance and risk tolerance because it's a dangerous environment in the sense that that incidents have doubled year over year, 2020 versus 2019, and the regulatory environment's getting a little more complicated. But it's not a one-size-fits-all for all of our clients, so it takes a little time and thought. We find the right balance, and it works for employees and it works for employers. So it's been an interesting year, and it'll be an interesting couple of years moving forward.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, JP. Next, I'd like to introduce our next panelist, and that is Barry Bader, who's Regional Vice President of Comcast Business, a region that includes New Hampshire, Eastern Massachusetts, and Maine. Barry has more than 20 years of managerial and sales experience in the telecommunications industry, and has been with Comcast Business since 2019. So welcome, Barry.
Jeff, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here today. This is exciting and so relevant, especially in Massachusetts, where, on the 29th, business will be returning to full capacity. And technology has been such an important factor for businesses over the past year and will continue to be on the path forward. So whether it's enabling their workforce to securely work, continue to work from home, continue to launch new contactless services, and now really what's facing a lot of companies is what's the return to office strategy and what do you need from a technology stance in order to accommodate for that. For some companies it's hybrid, for some companies they're going back fully. So how do you matriculate out of that environment back to whatever the new normal is? So I'm super excited to be here, and I'm proud of our organization. We've been able to support our customer base every step of the way, and we'll continue to do so. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks to both of you. And once we get JP, here he is. Very good. So maybe we'll start with something. First of all, before we get going, let me remind our audience that there's a place where you can ask questions. And if you ask us a question, which we're really happy to have here, and I know everybody, both Barry and JP are eager to answer, I will definitely read them. So just to keep that in mind. Anyway, what I also just want to start with an easy one. Well, relatively. To me, it's easy. I'm asking it. Just in general, what are some of the challenges that businesses have faced in the pandemic when it comes to their computer networks, whether it's cyber security challenges or other things as well? Just in general, what have we been dealing with for the last, well, almost a year and a half now? Barry, would you like to?
Sure, I can start. So it's no surprise that the biggest challenges have stemmed from initially was the overnight shift to a remote work environment. So that was quite a shock for a lot of companies, and businesses had to adapt to contactless ways of doing business, and while doing so, ensuring that they had the right connectivity. Businesses had to make sure that their employees had fast, reliable access to data, network, and applications. So, and long before the pandemic, Comcast had offered Comcast Business Teleworker, which allowed employees who work from home and require an enterprise level grade of service, to log in via VPN as if they were virtually within their office. So we closely work with a lot of different businesses to provide employees with dedicated in-home enterprise grade level connectivity separate from the residential services. So I think that was a big challenge, and it was a challenge for us as well. We had to flex in ways that we never have before. And I'll give you an example. We had a customer in southern New Hampshire that had to pivot. It was a call center. They had to pivot from being in a call center environment, everyone's there, to really overnight everyone working at home. So we were able to take 138 data connections, get them switched over to their home environment to be and remain connected so they could continue business. So that's not only a challenge for companies, but a challenge for us, but it allowed us to flex in ways that we didn't realize we could before, and shortening our intervals and things like that.
What about from your perspective, JP, what are some of the challenges that we saw?
The immediate challenge was definitely the technological, the business continuity. I think after we sort of got over that, now, particularly the information security folks or the IT folks are now concerned about how do we make this sustainable from a security perspective long term. If you think about the hygiene things that companies do all the time, password management and updating firewalls and patches and upgrades and all of that stuff, all of that is more complicated when you have 50 employees working remotely, and you're dependent on home routers where the default password is still password, or people are using the same passwords for all of their personal accounts and their work accounts, or the kids are setting up the aircraft server on the same network that people are trying to access their work resources. So, now I think with just companies are having to broaden their perspective about their risk, right? To make sure they know what types of data is being moved from one location to another, who has access, do those people really need to have access? The initial reaction was, we just got to stay in business, we got to keep everybody working. And now I think it's a little bit of a contraction and a reevaluation of what that means from a security perspective.
But just to follow up a little bit, what about this idea that more people are going to be working remotely? What do us as an employer do about that specifically? If it's someone who needs to or wants to work remotely, and maybe they're not up to snuff with that, what can an employer do in terms of that network security?
So again, we're basically extending these little tentacles from the security plan that you have in place for your home office, your headquarters, and extending that out into the world. So training is crucial, right? You can invest all you want in the technological protections, but if you have employees sending W-2s or clicking on phishing emails or whatever, you're just undercutting the investment you've made. So there's figuring out how to train people in this remote environment is one thing, and companies have been doing that pretty well, I think. But getting employees to understand that their home security, that changing the default password on their home router or upgrade, doing the firmware upgrades and things like that for their home resources is just as important as, coming into the office and making sure we're not saving files on local hard drives or thumb drives or any of that. So it's just a little bit of a reevaluation, sort of an extension of the things that companies did normally, just making sure that permeates into the home life as well.
So, well, I guess the thought I have is that with security being so important, and we've seen it this whole year, year and a half now, is it still possible there are, employees don't understand this? I mean, it just seems like, it's being drummed into people's head. We've, in my publication alone, we've written many articles about it, including by you, JP, about cybersecurity.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Even when we had people under our direct supervision, the humans were always the significant vulnerability. That has not gone away. The vulnerability is still at home as well.
So I guess from your perspective, Barry, how can business owners or their IT teams, how can they help overcome these challenges, or anything from your end?
Yeah, sure. So, great points by JP's, right? And securing a business is hard enough when everyone's in place, as JP suggested, right? You have humans who are can make errors, but when they're working from home, or someone working from home, it can be even more difficult. So regardless of who your provider is, get to know what their offerings are for security measures. With Comcast, if you lease a modem from Comcast on the residential side, we have XFi Advanced Security is available at no cost. On the business side, we have Security Edge, which helps you. It's a cloud-based offering that helps protect all of your devices. But JP hit on something that I would say is paramount to all of this, which is training. And we continue to train our employees. I would encourage all businesses to train their employees. Have drills set up, where they're actually tests to go out within the network. The short answer, Jeff, is yes, there are still things that that come up and mistakes are made, and some people don't realize how easy it is to be compromised. So I strongly encourage all organizations to put training at the forefront, on how to be preventative.
Yeah, we have a question from one of the audience members that pertains to this specifically. It's probably more in JP's field, but I'll give it to both of you. Can employers have technology security agreements that hold employees accountable for network security?
Yes and no. You want to have a network or device usage policy, and you want to make sure that policy has been updated to reflect your new reality of employees working from home. So you can govern that level of conduct to a degree, but you have to ask yourself, other than reserving the right to discipline an employee for non-compliance, what really are your prospects of recouping any losses from the typical individual? Usually employers focus themselves on more traditional disciplinary schemes, written warnings or up to termination, let's say. But it's very difficult to police everyday conduct when people are in the building and when they're at home. And like I said, you've got all these other people utilizing the same network that people are sharing for work purposes. There are just aspects now that are even further out of an employer's control than they were 19 months ago.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you directed it to JP as well.
Well, it just raises, I mean, like JP, you referred to that survey in your opening remarks about more businesses just assuming they're going to be doing some kind of remote going forward, forever, basically. But these issues come up, and so at some point, what is a business going to be doing about this? If there's still continued, laxness on the part of employees.
Yeah, well, they might scale back the remote work policy. I mean, there's really no guarantee that it has to continue. That raises a whole host of challenges, from employee relations to discrimination claims, and you decide who gets to come back and who gets to work from home, or ADA accommodation claims where people assert that they have to work from home as an accommodation. And there's a whole minefield associated with making those decisions. Another solution might be for companies to actually supply the hardware, right? And so that I'm not so reliant on my home network to work from home, or my kid, I'm not on the same sort of network. Barry was talking about sort of splitting the residential from the commercial at home. And that may become more of a reality as time goes on. Another thing I think companies will look more closely at is their cyber insurance. That if they can't control as much as they'd like to control at home, at least they could try to insure against that risk, or shift the risk in other ways with contractual arrangements with cloud providers or other providers that are now sort of in the mix to help facilitate the remote work environment.
Yeah, Barry, Comcast works with employers doing those kinds of setups where with the hardware and separate hardware for at home, at the resident's home, the employee's home.
Yeah, we strongly recommend leasing equipment from Comcast, versus your own. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, this is an interesting one that I didn't even know this existed. So I'm asking this question because I'm curious. What about third-party services that can periodically send phishing emails to employees and management, with an exclamation mark, and report the results back to management? First of all, I didn't know those things existed. So.
Oh yeah. So it's something here at the firm we do that. We subscribe to a service that periodically tests. There are different components to it. There's a training component, which is essential. But then it will send out tests to see who clicks, and if you click on the link you're not supposed to click on, you got to go back to training message. So that's definitely a very popular tool that can be deployed to a home workforce, just like if everyone was sitting, in the office. So that's a good one from that perspective.
And these are effective, these third-party services? Do people really understand?
Yeah, I don't have statistics on how effective they are generally, but they are great at sort of catching people and training them what to look out for, to make your end users more vigilant and just more knowledgeable about what the scams are, because they change over time.
Now, Barry, I have a question for you about network reliability. Although I guess this is for both of you, really. It's just like, first of all, what does Comcast do as a provider to ensure that businesses stay connected during various, whether it's weather or whatever the concern might be?
Sure. So I'll start with, our network was built to provide flexibility and reliability, so we can quickly respond to any shifts or spikes in usage to keep businesses connected, regardless of unexpected events that occur throughout the wider world. We saw an unprecedented shift in network usage as companies transitioned from being in the office to remote work, and it was nothing beyond what our network could handle. We take it very seriously. Since 2017, Comcast has invested $15 billion, which has helped position us to be able to handle any type of surge in traffic, and specifically with folks working from home. We monitor our network constantly. Even on the local level, we look at all areas individually. And when they anywhere near peak performances or capacity, we address it, well in advance. So throughout the pandemic, we've continued to deliver speeds and capacity to our customers' needs, and we're taking every step that we can to ensure that our customers have the best experience possible. So, that's I would sum up just in terms of we've been prepared for this even prior to the pandemic coming.
Can you share us some examples with us of how Comcast in particular supported businesses during the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we did offer some payment assistance plans for organizations. And then another example is Comcast Rise, which specifically helps small businesses owned by people of color to either receive tech or ad makeovers for their businesses to help them move forward. So far, we've helped nationally 2,500 small businesses around the country, and the plan is to help an additional 13,000 by 2022. And I think we may have a video to share as well.
I guess we do.
I think we do.
I think we're having some technical difficulties.
How ironic.
Yeah, I know. Well, we'll probably get back to that. Emily, just let us know when it's available. But I just get back to some other ideas that I have here, some questions. In terms of, I know that because we've had published several articles about this, JP, about potential new laws and regulatory regulations that are either here or may be coming down the pike. Can you tell us a few about some of these things and what the effects are?
Yeah. So California was the first really to pass a general privacy law like this. Virginia just adopted one. Florida considered one in this session, and as I mentioned, New Hampshire has considered a bill very similar to California's, but it did not pass. But in general, it requires a few things. Disclosure by companies as to what data they collect and how they use it, how long they keep it. Gone are the days where you could just collect as much information as you could and just keep it, for marketing purposes. Or there's really a recognition that you need to justify why you're keeping data, and you need to have a purpose for it. But the flip side of that is it has empowered consumers with a whole host of rights that you have to give them now. If you have data about them and it's incorrect, you have to give them the right to correct it. They have this right to be forgotten, they call it. So if they have the right to request that you purge your records of data about them. And so if you don't have policy, if you don't have the procedures in place to field these questions or these requests when they come in, you're going to be left kind of scrambling. And there are regulatory penalties that are possible in those jurisdictions if you can't comply. So it's making its way across the country. We don't have a federal, uniform general privacy law, so we're sort of left with different requirements in different states. And that's why this remote workforce thing, I think, triggers some potential risk for folks. Where now, now it's okay for me to have employees in Virginia. I didn't before, but now I do. Now am I subject to this Virginia statute, whereas I wasn't before? So figuring out which laws apply is a task in and of itself. And then, as I mentioned before, sort of figuring out what level of compliance is optimal for each business is really the key for us.
What's the status in New Hampshire in particular?
So as I mentioned, there was a bill that would replicate basically the California statute. The California statute drew a lot of criticism. It was created hastily. It was going to become law as part of a ballot referendum, and the legislature just sort of sprung into action and drafted a law that a lot of people were unhappy with, and they're still sort of figuring out how to apply it. That bill was introduced in New Hampshire, and it did not get enough traction. I don't think it has a whole lot of hope in the current session or current environment, but you're going to see states around us. I mean, even if New Hampshire doesn't adopt one, if you've got employees that live across the border in Massachusetts, or like I said, anywhere else, you're going to have to keep your eye on what's going on. New York is working on one, for example. So you just have to broaden your view, I think, a little bit with respect to compliance, because we're just we're opening ourselves up to new laws.
I have a question from an audience member about this, about the California law. Is it binding on non-California businesses who have California customers or clients, like the GDPR for EU, the big policy? So it
depends. There's a threshold built into the statute that you have to do business above a certain threshold or have data about above a certain limit on our threshold on a certain number of California residents. So it depends on the volume of business. If you don't have a physical presence there, it depends on how much business you do there.
Okay, interesting. Barry, I'll just get back to you because we have another question from an audience member about Comcast. Will Comcast security features conflict with other commercial services like Norton, Avast, McAfee, etc., causing usability issues?
So we have a lot of clients that use all of those services, and candidly, what we would do is field those questions, have a network service engineer answer them, but for the most part, they are compatible. But again, I would leave that to the absolute experts, which would be one of our service engineers, and obviously your IT department, because different companies have different network setups and configurations, and sometimes you don't know what's behind the firewall other than just those products.
Okay.
It really can be a case-by-case basis, depending upon how they're set up. Do they have coax? Do they have fiber? How intricate is their network? It's really case by case. But we do have service engineers that can answer those questions.
There's another question here about Comcast. Can Comcast provide network equipment that can fall over and fall back to cell connections if cable is down?
We do. We absolutely do. So we have a product that's called Connection Pro, and it's meant exactly for that. It's provided to our Comcast business customers, and we have been providing it for some time now. It's an optional service which automatically provides wireless backup service in the event of a power outage. And we're exploring a similar service for residential customers in the coming months, but we do have that for Comcast business.
This question about the security outside security services raised the question about a business dealing with other third-party vendors. That's another particular vulnerability, isn't it? I mean,
so of the breaches that we've worked on, or security incidents that we've worked on in the last 3 months, I think 3/4 of them have actually been vendors of our clients. The vulnerabilities associated with these third parties as they become more integrated into our workspace is very important from a from a lawyer's perspective anyway, because there are things that I don't think get considered all the time. The business people make decisions on products for business reasons, and we're trying to get our clients to include a security assessment on these third parties before they get under the tent, if you will. And there are things like, what promises and warranties are they really making about security? Will they notify you immediately of any incident, not just a breach, so that you can make your own decision about what needs to be done? Indemnification clauses and limitations of liability, those are all, what insurance do they have, and will you be covered? Those are all, from a lawyer's perspective, really, really crucial things that we're trying to get our business folks to make sure they pay attention to. But the third party breaches put our clients in a difficult spot, because they're not the breach, right? It didn't happen on our servers, but our customers, our clients' customers' information has been exposed in some way. So is the vendor going to take care of the notices? Who's going to pay for that? Some of these third parties have taken the position, well, it wasn't an actual breach, so we don't have to notify, and that puts our clients in a difficult spot. Well, they want to maintain relationships with their customers. They don't want them to find out after the fact that we knew and we didn't tell anybody. And it's this interesting dance about who's going to provide notice and what's required from a regulatory perspective. So we really just encourage folks to have a real plan to vet your vendors before you get them involved.
I mean, it sounds relatively simple, but it can't be. I mean, how do you vet your vendors that way? I mean, what do you do? I mean, what's the tactic you use?
Yeah, so you want to get your IT professionals involved as part of the decision-making process. You can develop sort of a questionnaire, if you will, to find out some basics about, have they adopted a cybersecurity framework, and or have they had an outside party certify their compliance with that framework? Another thing is, you don't just want to forget about this once the deal is signed. If you sign a 3-year agreement with some vendor, you want to have a plan in place where you continue to monitor and get information from them. A lot of the larger vendors are adopting a cybersecurity framework, and they're getting certified by third parties, and they're willing to share the results of those audits, if you will, on a periodic basis. So at least you have some sense that they're secure. But there's often a partnership where you as the customer have an obligation to protect your part of it, and there's just sort of this intertwined relationship where they have some security obligations and you have security obligations, and you have to make sure that they all kind of marry together as the relationship evolves. It is, like I said, it's not just over once you sign the deal.
Yeah, I have a related question from the audience member here. Are there ways to transfer risk to third-party vendors, or do their agreements eliminate their exposure?
So when you get an agreement from a vendor, it will normally try to transfer as much of that risk or disclaim as much of that risk as possible. And so you've got to try to negotiate for that, which is not always the easiest thing to do when you've got a big company on the other side. They're really disinterested in changing. But the things to look out for are, what does the indemnification clause say? And one of the traps really is, many of these contracts say, under no circumstances will our liability exceed the amount you've paid in service fees for the last 12 months, let's say. And that may not, if you're paying $30,000 a year for the services, that may not be a sufficient cap on their exposure back to you. So, I encourage you to examine these contracts carefully, take a shot at negotiating them. The worst thing that happens is they say no and you make a business decision, but at least you've tried to improve your position as best you can. The insurance is a big part. If you can, like I said, that's only going to help you after the fact, but if you can allocate some risk to a carrier and get some comfort that you're going to be covered in the event of their breach, that goes a long way.
So Barry, I want to get back to you. Right before, just a little while ago, I asked you about what Comcast is doing, some examples of what Comcast is doing to support small businesses during the pandemic. And I believe we will try again with part of that answer, which you said you had a video, and I know I want to see it. So let's see if we can do it this time. Yeah.
No audio. That's
Well,
all right.
I guess it's.
That's all right. I'll repeat, just the program, which is
Why don't you do
Comcast.
that?
Yeah,
This darn technology.
there you go. But yeah, Comcast Rise is specifically designed to help small businesses owned by people of color to either get a tech makeover or ad makeovers or service for a year. So if you do know a BIPOC owned business, please direct them to Comcast Rise. It's very easy. There's an apply button in the top right corner, and we welcome all applicants. So it's a great program, and we're looking to help as many people as we can.
Okay. So, I'd like to get back to this idea of network reliability again, because that's something that I know. I live in Manchester now, but I used to live in New London for like 35 years, and network reliability was always top of mind. Whenever it snowed or rained or wind, I didn't have Comcast, so. But the reliability of the network was really sensitive to the weather. And I know that we have more extreme weather now, and we are entering the storm season, hurricane season. So what do we, what is done to ensure reliability as much as you can?
Well, listen, our network's highly reliable, and Jeff, I think just technology has advanced a lot over the course of the 20 years. I've been in this business for 20 years, and regardless of the company, I think you saw a lot more outages 20 years ago than you do today. But we mentioned earlier that we do have Connection Pro through Comcast, which again helps you prepare for those moments, so that in the event that there is an outage, it will flip over directly to a wireless backup service. So there are things that you can do to prepare for that. That's an example that Comcast offers that I would encourage you to explore whatever provider you have to see what they have for offerings as well. But that's certainly front and center. And I can speak on behalf of our organization. When there is a storm coming, we go into storm mode well in advance. And it's not orchestrated by me. It's orchestrated by collaboration of technical operations, construction, senior leadership, and we have a series of calls leading up to an anticipated event, so that we can be in the best position to be able to go out and fix drops, to be able to be nimble, have extra personnel on hand, so that we know it's going to happen. So we put ourselves in the best position to be able to remedy as soon as possible.
Hey, Jeff, could I weigh in a little bit on this too? Because in a remote environment, or where you're using cloud providers to store your data, it isn't just the hurricanes that come up the East Coast. If your data is on a server farm in some other part of the country that has an event, you've got to be prepared for that too. So getting back to sort of vetting your vendors, one thing that business people I'm sure are asking about is, will our data be co-located? Is it only in one spot? And if that spot gets hit by some event, are we out of luck? Or can you just switch it over now that we've got a server farm in North Carolina and one in Oklahoma, or whatever it is? But the world is flat now, right? Our data is, weather events can affect your data in some other part of the country that you never even really bothered to think of before.
Yeah, it really is. That does raise interesting questions about that. So this idea of a cloud provider having backup clouds, I guess, is that one way of putting it? Is that true of most of them, or some of them, or should you
it's
search
very
out
common, very
providers?
common now, particularly for the larger providers, that your data is not really in one physical place, so that if there is a problem in one physical location, they switch you over to another. So that's pretty common these days.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'd add on to that a lot of large enterprise organizations that have intricate networks house their servers and data centers, throughout the country. We have a lot of them in the greater Boston area. And I'd mentioned the investment we've made earlier since 2017. A portion of that investment is making sure that the data centers that we're built into being diverse. So I'd say that's crucial as well when designing a network. So again, to JP's point, there are backups, for cloud companies as well. So it's really just making sure that you vet what your network structure is, and making sure that it's suitable for your needs.
Yeah, I just wanted to something that you said earlier, JP, that really struck me. You mentioned how employers, with remote ability to have people work remotely, because we know that employers are really in New Hampshire are really struggling to find workers, and by having this option of having people work remotely, is that something that, if you find someone, you can have someone work for you in, California or Alaska or whatever. Are there any risks with that, having people working in other states? I mean, you have to think about other laws and other matters as well.
Right. Well, so you've got to assume that employee protective legislation is going to apply to employees living in California, for example. And so understanding the regulatory environment in California, which is frequently thought of as very different than in New Hampshire, the answer is yes. You've got to assume that those employees are going to be protected by employee-friendly protective legislation in all those jurisdictions. So it makes your regulatory environment much more complicated. Even there's even the instance where you contract with employees, right, where you have non-disclosure agreements, for example, let's say, frequently you can sort of choose one state's law to apply to everybody, even if they're all over the place, as long as the state you choose has some reasonable relationship. So if you're headquartered in New Hampshire and you want New Hampshire law to apply to your contracts, that's generally doable. But when it comes to things like wage and hour compliance, or those kind of employee-friendly issues, you really ought to assume you're subject to those states' laws if you're going to have employees sitting in those jurisdictions.
And that goes for a larger employer that has an HR department and maybe even a legal department, and a smaller employer that maybe doesn't even think about this, and that actually could raise some other issues as well, right? I mean, if you have never really dealt with that kind of stuff before.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, it strikes me. This is not. I'm not talking about another state, but this idea of offering remote work, it's really changed the dynamics of employer-employee relationship. Because I heard a story from an employer whose office is in Concord, and he had a longtime employee who just said during COVID, I'm taking a job with a company in Portsmouth, even though the drive to Portsmouth was, by New Hampshire standards, impossible from where the employee lived. And he said, really, you're going to be doing that commute? He says, no, I could just work from home. They just said I could just work from home from now on. And he just didn't. I don't want to get into what the business is, but it's a kind of business where you think they need to have some hands-on occasionally. And it's like it's a whole different world out there for that. I mean, that's a thing that employers need to be thinking about when they don't offer remote, that there are potential employees who just will say, no, that's it. I need to have access. I mean, I need to be able to work from home at least a few times, somewhat on some level.
Right.
So I think the pandemic's really raised that kind of, shown us that whole option that never really existed before.
And then you have some businesses that are going to start looking at their lease expenses and say, we don't need this much physical space. We're going to reconfigure our offices because we're going to have people only come in, once a week or twice a week. They don't need a dedicated office space. It's likely to have some other significant impacts to other parts of how employers make decisions.
And we have another comment from someone in the audience that's really a good one, is about workers' comp. If you have a employee in another state, you have to be familiar with those workers' comp rules and regulations,
Right.
because they're also different.
Yeah, not
And
just that, but workers' comp extends to the home environment too. So you've got somebody that trips over the dog at home, and I wish that was a joke, but that's a real case. That's a workplace injury. So it's far more complicated for HR professionals in this environment, for sure.
I have to say, I'm just curious. I'm a journalist, so I've got to follow this up a little bit. You trip over your dog, does it have to be during working hours?
Yeah,
I mean,
right. So you're in the home office, let's say, and it's you're getting up from your desk or whatever, and your employer knows you're working from home. It's a trip hazard, just like tripping over the cable to the printer in your physical space. The workers' comp laws extend to workplace injuries suffered in the home environment.
wow. I got to remember that next. No, that's very strange, because, just speaking for me, I work remotely now or have been, and, I'm working on Sunday morning or whatever. It's not normal working hours, but just if I'm happen to be doing my job and I trip over the dog, that doesn't matter what time of day it is or anything?
If your employer has reason to believe that you're working in this manner and it's part of the sort of sanctioned work environment, now sure, the facts matter, okay, and individual circumstances might lean one way or the other, but I think the general theme is we need people to be mindful of, if we're just trying to identify risk, that's one to consider. And there's very little employers can do to exert control over the workplace at home, but there are things you can do. Try to have some policies in place about, trip hazards and fall hazards and those kind of things as best you can. And have sort of, if you can, and not everybody can do this, but have sort of dedicated workspace so you're not sitting at the dining room table, with all this other stuff going on around you, but you're actually working in a place that you have some level of control over.
Interesting. Anyway, Barry, back to you. I think I just want to get a little more specific about this. Are there specific technologies that businesses, especially small businesses, should be considering that could help them meet their security concerns? I mean, just in terms of the hybrid workforce, or anything else anything specific?
I mean, I'd say one of the most important is making sure that you have a secure, reliable connection to connect remote, hybrid, and employees that are still inside the office. And a lot of companies have that set up. Having the same network access and service for remote workers so that they're experiencing as if they were, in the office. Fully managed, having a fully managed service that can, anything you can do to reduce the burden on IT and help desk resources. And then ensuring that you have enterprise level customer support 24/7. So I think those are some of the key things to consider. And, it's interesting, the last conversation that we brought up when JP just, brought a new element that I never even thought of in terms of, work from comp and things like that from home. And these are, there's that and a lot more challenges that, all companies are facing. And I'd say that the more you can network in this environment and learn from other companies and what other companies are doing, I think is powerful in terms of formulating your best strategy. Because I don't believe there's one silver bullet for all companies. It's really it's individual and needs to be tailored to your organization.
Actually, speaking of this, working from home and liability is another question from the audience that's interesting. How are insurers dealing with the injured while working at home issue when they are evaluating employer risks? Do either of you have an answer for that?
No, I don't have an answer on the workers' comp side. I do have a few thoughts about cyber insurance, though, that I'm hopeful people will hear, and that is, when you apply for your cyber insurance, you fill out this application so they can underwrite your risk. You make certain representations about the kind of data you have and who has access to it and all that. Those representations might not be as accurate if you've got a whole bunch of new employees working from home. And if you have a claim, your application is part of your policy. So if you have a claim and you've misrepresented, your risk, there's a possibility the carrier will deny the claim on that basis. So to sort of tie it back to the technological, your cyber risk policy normally covers regardless of location. You got to check your policy because they're not uniform. But the question really is the employee authorized to access and is the device authorized to access? And that usually extends to people sort of working from home with permission. But again, if you've made representations about the security of your network, and now those representations are not as accurate as they were before because you're relying on home devices that are not as secure, you actually run some risk with respect to your cyber coverage.
Well, that does make sense. And I mean, I'm thinking in terms of when it's a business with, a larger business. And I mean, by New Hampshire standards, larger, let's say 50 employees, that you might have an ability to do that, to keep track of that. But if you're a smaller business, that's going to be not onerous, but another just more difficult thing to do, to have to deal with things like that.
Yeah, finding a good partner, on your IT side, your managed service provider or your in-house IT provider. Folks are trying to complement that now with an outside information security professional, which is different than your IT provider, right? Your IT provider keeps you up and running every day, provides some level of security, but there are a host of professionals around that are information security professionals that actually sort of test the vulnerabilities of that system and give you some feedback about how you can improve about that on that. And it's somebody separate than your everyday IT provider. Companies are trying to find professionals like that to help them assess this risk and manage it.
Now, actually, you're raising an issue that I think is important, that I think both of you can address, is this idea when you're coming up with a security plan or trying to address security, it's not just dealing, you're not working in silos here. You have the security people, you have legal, you have the IT people and insurance and others. I mean, how is that? I mean, that's something that's going to be somewhat difficult to manage, but how does a company approach, how does an employer approach that?
No, it is a project. It needs to be viewed that way. It's a combination of those elements that you've described plus the business people. This has to work on a business level. It can't be, here's a plan to protect you against every risk that will ever come. That is not feasible. Having the legal team involved has a couple of benefits. One is that you can try to protect some of this work in a privilege so that if you do have an incident later, you can try to protect some of the work product associated with that. But the legal component is also to help identify the risk and actually put down on paper some procedures so that companies can actually conduct their business and manage the risk at the same time. But you're right, if you just deal with just the information side and you don't deal with either the regulatory or the insurance side, you're kind of leaving yourself vulnerable. It has to be a kind of a team effort that's run as a project in and of itself.
It does seem like, a big chore, but I guess it's very important, obviously, as we've been talking about. Anyway, Barry, from the, you talked about technology, but I'm just still kind of curious, are there any others that small and medium-sized businesses should be thinking of, like other kinds of technologies related to remote workforce that they should be thinking about?
Well, again, I think that, you want to ensure that you, like I said before, you have your connection's reliable and it's really tailored to each individual, company. So we have a full suite of products, and can speak on behalf of Comcast, that can be tailored to whether you're a Main Street business that only has the necessity for a couple of phone lines, to an advanced network that has hundreds of locations across the company. country, excuse me. So it really can vary, and your security needs are going to vary, from case to case. So I don't know that there's one box that I would put every organization into. It really varies depending upon the size of your company, the nature of your business, and how complex your network is.
Yeah. Since we only have a few minutes left, I just wanted to try one more, have one more question, unless someone from the audience wants to ask one. What are the biggest takeaways people should have thinking about this from each of your perspective about going forward in terms of having remote workforce, and what are the main issues and concerns that a business owner should be focused on? Barry, do you want to start, or?
Sure, I can start. I think, number one, it's got to be a collaboration within, whether you're a small organization or a larger organization, it has to be a collaboration considering, all your different departments, and what their needs are. And, for us, we have sales departments, we have technical operations, we have construction. And so, one size doesn't fit all in terms of, who can be remote, who can't be remote, who needs 100% remote access and who doesn't. So again, it's really tailored to what the needs of your organization is. But I think number one, it comes through communication and, making sure that you're vetting, all aspects of your business.
JP?
Yeah, I would echo that every company needs to do some level of risk assessment. And I think the takeaway I'm hoping people catch from today is that the new remote work environment just means you've got to extend that risk assessment into people's homes and make sure you understand, what data is being accessed there and how and by whom. There are solutions to these problems, and as I tried to mention before, finding the right balance, for one company is not the same for the next. So just broadening your view. I'm just trying to get people to understand that we've got people working from home now, and that's terrific. We can solve the security problems with a little bit of focus, and the technology will continue to improve. That this will get better over time, I think.
Yeah, I've noticed that how technology just changes overnight. Just judging by how my iPhone keeps updating with new software updates. Anyway, listen, I want to thank both of you, Barry Bader of Comcast Business and JP Harris of Sheehan Phinney, and also thank our sponsors, Comcast Business and Sheehan Phinney, for today's webinar. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. And thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.